The Biden administration issued an executive order to update the social cost of carbon value used by the federal government. A new report finds that the cost is $185 per metric ton. Kevin Rennert is a fellow at the nonprofit Resources for the Future, a lead author on that report. He's also a former deputy associate administrator at the EPA. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here.
So first, explain what the social cost of carbon is.
Sure. The social cost of carbon is an estimate in dollar terms of the damages to society from an additional ton of greenhouse gases being emitted to the atmosphere. Our study looks at carbon dioxide, but there are similar metrics for methane and nitrous oxide.
And when you say damage to society, what does that mean? What are those factors that go into it?
Sure. In our study, we look at four. So temperature-related mortality, so increased risk of dying from high heat, as well as changes in costs of agriculture and yields, as well as effects on the coastlines and also effects on energy costs.
And you've been finding that things like mortality have been going up because of climate change.
That's exactly right. That is a well-known fact. And so what our study tries to do is to take those findings and put them into this framework to figure out sort of what are the costs associated with that.
Is that something that can really be estimated? I mean, how do you know? I mean, you're predicting the future.
You absolutely are predicting the future, but what you're really trying to do is understand the uncertainty around the future. And that's what our study does, is to look at uncertainty in future economic growth, in population, in all kinds of things like that, bring in a climate model that's up to the state of the science, and look at this up-to-date research on what's happening with mortality and in agriculture and coastal impacts and energy, and figure out what the value is, but also what the uncertainty is around that.
So what ultimate impact does this really have on federal government spending, on policies? Why does it really matter?
It's a very influential metric because it shows up in a lot of different things that the federal government does. For example, anytime the federal government takes a major action, it is required by a long-standing executive order to do what's called a cost-benefit analysis. And so in that analysis, they try to take all of the different costs that might result from the action and all the different benefits and assess them against each other and make a decision that's informed by all of that science. So when we take the social cost of carbon, they are using that value as part of those benefits calculations, and they will make decisions accordingly.
So your number came out to be $185 per metric ton. What is the Biden administration's number currently, and why a difference?
Right. So the Biden administration number currently is $51 per ton. It's actually harkens back to the Obama administration's number. They have just put it back in as an interim number while they are updating the science. So they are going through a process themselves through their own executive order to update their number that they will use in their analysis. And our research hopefully will inform what they eventually do.
Well, but this is alarming that it's over 3 times more.
Certainly.
So what does that mean really for us?
Certainly. So in terms of the difference, as getting to your question, so the difference comes from a few different pieces. Some have to do with what we think is going to happen in the future in terms of what our economy might look like or what the population might be. It also has to do with what we think the state of the science is on these damages. And then one last piece is just how we value these future damages. These damages from greenhouse gases stay in the atmosphere for a long time. They continue to accrue. And so how you tally those up and put them into sort of today's terms is a very important piece of the calculation. When we update the methodology for that, we find that that has a significant influence on the overall number.
What's the process for officially updating that number, since it's such an important number? What happens? How often is it updated?
So the official process the federal government goes through is to set up what's called an interagency working group that now has, I think, 11 different agencies in it. And they get together and they pore over the latest science and they try to come to an agreement as to what the update should be. Then they put it out for public comment. They take public comments, there's review, and so on and so forth. And eventually they put out a final number that starts to get used within official analysis. That process is going on right now. The interagency working group was disbanded during the Trump administration, so it was reenacted during the Biden administration, and they've been spending the last year and a half or so coming up to speed on the latest science so that they can come up with an update of their own.
So does that mean that your number is going to become the number, or how many other people are going to be involved in getting to that number?
Sure. So our number hopefully will play a role in that number that they eventually adopt, but that will be up to the federal government and the process that they come up with. I will say that the Biden administration executive order talked about this very influential National Academies report that laid out a whole set of scientific recommendations for the numbers. And we followed those recommendations. And so we're hoping that by having implemented those scientific recommendations by a nonpartisan third body of scientists, that the federal government will be more likely to take our numbers into account.
So let's talk about recommendations, right? And I know that your group just kind of researches and tries to do modeling and analysis. But what actual recommendations do you give to the federal government right now?
Sure. Our recommendations to the federal government are sort of twofold. One is that they should account for the science that we are accounting for in the paper that we have just written. So update the science fully, and taking our work into account would be an important step forward. The second is really on transparency. For a number like this that is so influential, it needs to be not only rooted in the best science, but also based in transparent science. And so the way that we have approached this problem is to have all of our source code for our models be completely open source, so anybody can download it, can look at it, can evaluate it, and also can build on it, so that the public knows exactly what we're doing, and they can also take it and run with it.
And Kevin, I know that you work with climate change, and it's not really a happy topic. I wonder how optimistic you are that we can really that the federal government can make the changes necessary that can kind of stem the tide, really, of what's happening with the climate.
Well, I will say it is certainly a monumental challenge. It's the challenge of our generation to move forward on climate change. And you need to shift the entire economy towards clean energy sources in lots of ways that could be potentially sort of disruptive. That said, I feel like the cost of those technologies have really come down in recent years. And the actions that the Biden administration has taken and the Congress has taken to try to make those costs come down even more through the Inflation Reduction Act will also help to move us in that general direction. Once you get there, I think it's going to be sort of a snowball effect, and it's going to be pretty rapid.
And do you think that social cost of carbon will eventually start to trend down?
It's certainly possible. The science is always evolving, and that's actually a really important thing to say about our study, is that this is one important step forward, but we're expecting this is the first step, and we will continue to evolve the science. Others will add their science to it, and the number will move forward as science evolves.
All right, Kevin, thanks so much for being on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.